Guys, welcome back to the channel. Eugene Cousins here. All right, it's been a wild ride through the last couple of episodes, and I'm glad that you guys have come back for episode 7. Uh, just to mention that for those that are new to the channel, the younger generation, I used to be, not used to be, I was the co-founder of the chimpanzee. Rescue Center here in South Africa, the Jane Goodall Institute, Chimpanzee Eden. Worked with Animal Planet as a TV presenter for a few years, worked in frontline conservation for more than a decade, and also became a pilot instructor. So that does take me away from having these conversations with my friends on the channel and on the Facebook group. But the added benefit is the fact that you guys have more time to work through the episodes and the content. And as the group keeps growing, we hope that it keeps growing, and then hopefully the podcast will get to a point where it's there's some other elements that could be connected to it as well, which I don't want to talk about right now. I'd rather keep that a surprise for later down the line. All right, so episode 7 is about animal experimentation. I don't want to make this too long, but it's not an open and shut case. It's not as simple as one would expect it to be. Just simply because I might have the position that I don't agree with animal experimentation, but on the other hand, if I'm crying out from being in immense pain, I would gladly take whatever the physician gives me to treat whatever that condition is. But I don't know what what testing that drug went through. And one has to expect that through the human development cycle that we've gone through, that a lot of these drugs exist today because of animal experimentation that has happened. So, what I want to kind of put you guys in a frame of mind where objectivity is key, so we can try and understand some of the elements which we need to consider, and then get to a point where we have some common ground in as a position. Again, I'm saying that my position is I'm against animal testing, and I think that the technology should exist whereby non-animal methods should be used for drug development. Okay, let's get into it. So a little bit of history might be good to start from, because people might say animal experimentation, but we are doing farming, for example. uh, it's still animals being subjected to some form of ill treatment, I would say. Hopefully not, but it's worthwhile discussing just in brief the history and why that is such a huge angle to look at for from the position that we are in today. So if you look back in history, I'm going to post an article here that was written by or was posted by by National Geographic, and it's a very great summarized article that takes on all the key points that we as a society, we as a species, to a large degree, owe our development that we are here, that we are in what state we are in today, because of agricultural farming and because of livestock farming being so successful from the recorded history that we have, about 13,000 years of progress that's happened. And there's a couple of contributing factors that both of these have lent towards the human species development. The one is that human beings could settle down. So figuring out how to do crops and livestock, population settles down, it causes a population explosion. And then the second benefit, it would free up a portion of society to work on other tasks. So instead of the guy having to go, look for his meal, um, he could be the baker, for example, that makes the bread for the society. And so then the economy gets additional elements worked into it, where specialists in farming could be doing the farming, but other portions of society could be doing other things. And at some point in history, the axial age onwards, you started having people that have had enough time to do theology and religious development, technological development, all up until up to the present date. Look at most of society today. Most of us do not go out and look for a meal every day. We don't. We are not hunter gatherers anymore. But you could travel to places in Africa and other parts of the world, I guess, where tribes like, for example, the pygmy, they are under pressure because they do live like that. And I mean that. I seriously mean that. They do not get a bag of flour from the local shop and bake up something, and they don't have crops. They live from fruits of the forest, or they live from what they can catch and kill in the forest. And those populations, or those tribes, they are under pressure because as the resource shrinks, um, they will they will be stuck in their development, in the sense that they won't grow as a population. Their numbers won't grow. So the food source, the stability of the food source, to a large degree determines how successful the population growth will be. And we'll get to population growth because a lot of people, and including myself a decade ago or so, would have had the opinion of following the party line of saying that population growth is a bad thing and we should just, we should lower our numbers. I can give you experts that still push that narrative, and the consequences of that is important to consider. But we'll talk about that. So those are the benefits that got us to where we are today, as far as as a species goes in general. So the pygmies are still surviving as a tribe, but they're not prospering. They're under pressure, and they're stuck in time to a large degree. The Western world, nope, we're doing pretty good. We can keep on developing our gadgets and toys and the newest cars and build homes and whatever else, and we can keep on prospering and thinking about solutions. And technological development is part of that. So we keep on improving our environment, not in our environment, but on improving on technology that ultimately will help us in some shape or form if we do it the right way. We could hope, and maybe with human evolution, when I say evolve, our mental evolution would take us to the point where technology is mostly applied to improving our position in living in harmony with the environment, exerting less pressure on the environment. I've spoken about this, for example, in one of my videos where I was talking about urban planning and cutting up land and how animals are not able to migrate. These are all things, and all of these things are topics that we have to discuss. But if we are talking about animals and livestock being such a big part of our developmental state, we have to talk about the fact that we're comparing those animals, how they're treated, with the animals that are also used in society, in a part of our society, which is also for our benefit, if experimentation was producing some benefit for us. Now, before we get into the numbers, I'm just trying to establish the common ground from which we can work. If we had to use, if we say that animals shouldn't be used in testing, what basis are we using to say that? Morality is something that has to be based on something. Now, we come from all different backgrounds. In today's world, a society is made up of different cultures, different religions, no religion. There are different, all kinds of different kinds of thinking going into the progress, and government largely gives us the rules by which we should live or function as a society. Whether you agree with it or not, that is how it has to function. And where we find problems, like, for example, animal testing, new laws, new acts, new things can happen that can that can create good positive change. And you can see that in America to a large degree. I'm going to use the United States here and there because they are a transparent country to a large degree, and at least they are transparent with information coming out, so we can use that information to gauge how population changes. But I have to be very clear about this. Companies that might dodge certain countries that are changing, but they could outsource that to somewhere else. not to say countries, but companies. Um, and we need to be careful and vigilant uh, to keep an eye on where companies are moving their facilities and what procedures they are using and testing wherever they move to. I don't think that companies are always that transparent as they make out to be. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, I don't want to go off track. What I'd like to get to is the fact that um, from a morality perspective, I mean, my morality, I'm a conservative Christian. I have, I'm disappointed on how often this is distorted by podcasters where they simply just do not understand what conservative Christianity means in the sense of being saved. Because you as a person changes as far as behavior goes. It's not about just studying the information in the Bible, but you as a person would change. And that is, I guess, my morality being lived out, um, and how I perceive my reality. So uh, that that often gets distorted with people just referring to what is stated in the Bible, for example. So that's just a short mention on myself. But um, how do you, as a person, if you're an atheist, for example, what do you use as a moral code, and where does that come from? So if we have a bit of a conundrum as far as an agreed morality goes, then we have to come up with something else um, to decide whether animals should be there or not. One more element to look into is the fact that farm animals or livestock, how they treated versus uh, animals that are being experimented on, because there is a bit of a code there when it comes to, I think we can look into, and that is, for example, the hunter's code, and just sharing some information on that. Now, we as human beings, we come from a hunter-gatherer background, and still um, part of our existence includes the fact that parks can exist, and reserves can exist because funding is established through the management of the animal population. So a hunter would, for example, pay to come and hunt an animal. It gets removed out of the animal population, and the animal populations has to be managed. You can't have a situation where animal populations cannot be managed. So that generates income, and it creates an environment where these reserves can and the populations of animals can continue to exist. But one very important code that gets connected with that is the fact that the hunter is not supposed to let the animal suffer. So you cannot, for example, as a hunter, shoot an animal, it's a very bad shot, the animal is wounded, and then say, oh, you know what, I'll just call it a day and go home. That's not supposed to exist within the hunter's code. Now, personally, I'm not part of a hunting organization, but I do understand from an objective point of view how this keeps parks alive, and how that code is important, and how that system is important for the modern world and for society to continue on. Now, go back in my post on Facebook, and you'll have a look at, for example, initiatives that are trying to come up with alternative funding methods, which would eliminate portions of hunting, for example, where it just wouldn't be necessary. This is what a lot of people don't understand. Some parks are located and have to be established, but also are located in remote areas, and they are they're required to get funding to continue existing and to keep on protecting the populations. And they sometimes have to make use of trophy hunting funding, because we as human beings don't, or photographers and whatever else, tourists don't. It's difficult to get there, so we pick the easiest destinations, and these places have a problem in generating funding. So as long as those problems exist, we don't come up with different solutions, they will continue to exist. So following initiatives like what I've posted below in the Facebook page, then have a look at that, because those kinds of initiatives are the ones that establish a different a different system going forward. I don't, I've always been open about the hunting of majestic species. I don't agree with it. I can't put myself. I understand the system, why some parks have to make use of it. I can't put myself in the hunter's shoes. That's what I'm trying to say. I can't make that decision to shoot a leopard, for example, as a trophy. It has no food source value. You're not taking the meat of the animal as a form of resource for you to feed your family. So I don't understand it other than being a form of revenue for the park. So it's a moral conundrum that we are stuck with, and it needs some form of solving if we were to replace that system. I'd much rather have that hunter try and hunt me in a fair game. Totally agree to that. I'm not going to get into that. It's just me just being sidetracked. All right, let's get into animal experimentation. If we look at how many animals, you'd be shocked. 115 to 190 animals per year go through the testing system. I'm talking about involved in animal testing and dying. So that's per year, per annum. That's an enormous amount. So I guess that's the bad news, is that to a large extent that those numbers still exist. It escalates and decreases. So it's a variable. It's not something that is constant. I think the only the big plus that's happened over the years, over the last few decades, is the fact that the species have changed, whereby and this I hate calling it this, but this is what they call monkeys and chimpanzees were is called the gold standard for testing. So 95% of that number that I mentioned would be species like mice now, and the other 5% would be other species. Now, those other species is something that is worth discussing, because domesticated species, to me, are species that have evolved to live with human beings, that have some form of link with human beings. We can form links with them, emotional bonds with them. And there's some form of communication that can happen. If you ask Dr. Jane Goodall what was her favorite animal, she's not going to say a chimpanzee. It was a dog. It was dogs as a species. That was her favorite animal species. And same with me. I'm a golden retriever guy. It's not a cat guy, but golden retrievers has been part of my adult life. So I understand that bond, and under no way can I imagine that species could be subject to animal testing just simply because they're an animal. So, and there's been a lot of scandals when it's come to this. I mean, let's take a situation, for example, like the COVID-19 pandemic that happened, and why I was referring to this moral conundrum and not being hypocritical. During all the fear mongering of COVID-19, I think the testing had to be sped up. And if you go and investigate the resources or the information resources about what animals were used in testing, you'd be shocked, because even monkeys, the gold standard, were used in the COVID-19 drug development. That is as far as my information goes. You guys can post some, if you have different information, well, welcome to post it. So that was even justified because of the threat being so large to human beings. Was it really that big a threat? I mean, I had COVID-19. A lot of people had it. I didn't take the vaccine, but I wasn't a susceptible person. I wasn't a high-risk person, and so you get to the point where you as a person have to sit and ask yourself, all right, I'm a susceptible person. Do I now justify the experimentation on the gold standard to get that drug? Now, personally, I don't agree with that, but I'm not in that situation, but I could be in the future for something else. It had an enormous effect on our society. It had a destructive effect on our society, and it will have for a very long time to come. I do know that not all the information was forthcoming. And if you look at the peer review studies coming out, there is lots more to learn about these drug companies and testing and whether these drugs were even viable. Um, Not even by the standard of vaccines do they classify as vaccines. So I think if we had all that information at the time, and if we were more resistant to fear mongering, a lot of us would have made decisions differently. So that's something to think about, because that is where we were hypocritical. Most of us would have said, well, can we get the vaccine and move on, please? But we didn't think about how that was being done, how that was being made, what decisions were being justified. So think about that. It's food for thought. That's where I'm getting to. Now, the NHI, for example, then located in the USA, they still, well, they did the whole Beagle Gate thing. I don't know if you know about that, but I'm going to post a link about an organization that fought that fight with the NHI about them providing funding to laboratories testing on beagle dogs. And a large number of these animals were abused in the testing process. And fortunately, there was an organization that fought that fight, won, and is removing all those animals, or have removed all those animals. I'm going to post the link, you guys can read through it. But that, to me, is one of those things where it's a hidden thing that has to come out, and then there's some form of justification to say that, yeah, it's for a good cause. It's going to solve this. It's going to solve that, and that justification shouldn't be there. There are laws being passed, and there is technology being developed. I mean, the non-animal methods of testing for drugs is something that should be invested in, so that these animals couldn't be tested on, and that these situations couldn't arise. So there are laws and acts coming out as well to prohibit that. Like, for example, the PAWS Act in America. Um, Go read up about it. It is the PAAW. Go have a look at that, for example, being passed. There are still primates being kept in captivity that are being tested on. So that is something that we have to fight against. Now, I'm going to post a link for you guys to have a look at an organization that is moving chimpanzees out of laboratories and towards sanctuaries, because fortunately, the testing on chimpanzees, I think, has mostly been eliminated. That fight's been won by some really good organizations that fought for it. They're being moved to sanctuaries, and there's an organization that focuses on making that happen. A lot of people ask me, how can they make, how can they contribute? How can they make a change? How can they do something good when they have a job that's completely different from conservation and being involved? And it's not about going to help an animal shelter, but it could be helping a specialist organization like this do their job, get the job done of making the world a better place. For example, moving these 225 chimpanzees out to sanctuaries, getting that done. And now moving to a different country. A decade ago, I was in Gabon, and I did an assessment for moving chimpanzees onto these little islands that are located inside bodies of water inside the rainforest. And there's now an organization that's focusing on putting laboratory chimps on some of these islands, and they've got an assessment team that want to go out there, and they're raising funds to do that. Another fantastic initiative that is happening. I mean, I tried to do this more than a decade ago, and I wasn't focusing on laboratory chimps, but the fact is that this could be such a huge improvement, because I stood outside the laboratory in Gabon where chimpanzee and gorilla testing was being done. So there was a fertility problem in Gabon, and those primates were used in experiments to try and develop drugs to address the situation. I don't know if these animals are the ones that could possibly move to these islands, but the point is that that's a positive development by an organization made up of experts that are going to do something. And you can support them. I'm going to put the link out there. I'd love to go visit that one day and see how they do. I've spent a lot of time looking at those islands and wishing that could be the possibility And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of resources to make that happen and sustain over time because it's off the beaten track. To travel there is just almost impossible. So it's very expensive, and people just don't do it. It's not a tourist destination like Disneyland. So let's get behind these organizations. Let's help these experts come up with funding models and with plans to make it happen. All right. So what else can we discuss on this topic? I think that we've covered a lot when it comes to experimentation on animals. I mean, we want it to, at least I want it to stop. Um, I want to be able to have to see more transparency in the drug developments. I mean, what is being justified? I wouldn't justify any, but let's just see what these companies can say. And I would like to see organizations or governments invest more money or put more pressure on these organizations to use non-animal methods for drug development. So that's my position on it. When it comes to the last point that I'm jumping back now towards is that I did touch on this in episode 1, and that was about population growth, and that we have so much to be thankful for because population, the systems that we came up with pretty much put us in a state where population growth could happen. And if we're not careful, complete societal collapse can happen. If you look at studies being done, looking at the birth rates and seeing what the ultimate consequences of those decisions could be, I think that is a very, very important consideration to take into account. Let me just put this into full perspective. And I'm talking about consequences now. We talked about drug testing. Why do we need so many drugs and different products the whole time from the pharmaceutical industry? It's because we are part of a society that is plagued by disease, by unhealthy situation, being unhealthy in general as the human condition is. And we need to ask questions why that is. Why are we so unhealthy as a society? And there's one link that I'm going to put in here. It's going to be a Grok link, which I want you to go and read about. And that is a court case that took place here in South Africa that most people just don't know about. They absolutely have no idea that this actually took place. But it was about the the medical authority here trying to remove the license of a medical professional, a professor, Professor Noakes. In this, because of this opportunity, was able to lay out evidence to explain in peer-reviewed studies the human, can I call it the human condition? But what are we designed? What are we as a species? How we are made up of? How we survive? What do we need? What do we do? How are we? As far as design goes, how do we function? What do we need as a species? Are we herbivores? Are we omnivores, etc.? So, because of decisions that you make as part of your diet determines whether you whether you're a healthy or unhealthy human being over time. And it absolutely put on full display the real reasons why these organizations come up with their dietary requirements, etc. It's not based on health, it's based on dietary requirements that's easy to produce for countries that that need food en masse because of wars and instability and needing a higher production of food sources for countries that can't produce it. But that is a far cry from what the human body actually needs to be healthy. Now, personally, I'm going to brag here by saying that I haven't had the flu since 2018, except the past cough I just gave. That's maybe touch wood that I'm not getting the flu. But since 2018, I haven't had the flu. So I'm a pretty healthy person. And it's because of me coming across this and adapting my diet and living a much more healthier lifestyle. And it does not have to involve the full-time exercise and trying to be some Olympian or whatever else. If you do not agree with what the studies the peer review studies within Professor Noakes' information says, then you need to understand consequences of that, being more unhealthy, and being more dependent on drugs. So there's consequences to that. And I think that is more food for thought. We have now taken this angle from animal testing from various directions. We've come in from the morality direction. We've come in from human population sustainability, and our food sources and what keeps population going. And we've looked at being, the information about being healthy, unhealthy, and our dependence on drugs. And hopefully we are getting to a point where we can say that some of the solutions will be getting behind organizations that can do something about animal testing, and also organizations that will enforce, not enforce, but will put more pressure on the government so that they can get to a point where technology is developed, but we don't need animal method testing. So animal method testing is what we're trying to phase out completely, okay? So I think we've discussed this in quite a bit of detail, and discuss it on the Facebook group, in the YouTube channel. Read the links that I post, guys. I go through a lot of trouble reading through these articles, and I've got a lot of more, but I'm just trying to narrow it down. Read through it, post your topics, and I'll be seeing you in episode 8.